With the defeat of the Spanish Empire by the United States by the late 1890s with the Spanish-American War, suddenly some very important colonies that used to belong to Spain now fell upon the lap of the United States. And therefore the country had to decide whether or not to formally annex these colonies. Now, of course, if they decided to pursue that, that basically meant that the United States was now officially an overseas imperial power, an empire, basically. But if they decided to grant these ex-colonies of Spain independence and allow them the right of self-determination, well, that was more in keeping with the American tradition thus far, the tradition of, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, and needless to say, those accord more with our beliefs in freedom and democracy, right? Okay, so at the same time, by the late 1800s, there was a new mood that swept through the country, and that's what I call expansionist fever on this slide. So, this, as I mentioned, provoked great debates, even among Americans, luminaries, well-known people in the United States that were interested in this so-called dilemma that we faced, and they wanted to make their opinions known. And you see this expressed in the media. You see this expressed by key military strategists. You see this expressed by political leaders, religious leaders, and so on and so forth. So as you can see on the slide, you see print media basically advocating overseas imperialism. Here's just one out of countless examples by the National Geographic, which we're all familiar with, and it's still with us today, of course. Well, here's what they said in their commentary about whether or not the United States should colonize the Philippines. To quote, the United States should take its rightful position among the nations of the earth. Now, nations of the earth here basically meant those European empires especially. All right, the British Empire, the French Empire, the emerging German Empire, Russian Empire, and so forth. The welfare of our nation lies largely in the development of trade with the nations south of us and the countries of the Far East meaning Asia. Our policy in the future must be an aggressive one, unquote. Okay, so not only is that last sentence eye-opening, we have to be aggressive in our pursuit of overseas imperialism, but take note of the fact that they are emphasizing here economic reasons as to why assuming the stance of imperialism and practicing it overseas, right, should be the correct path of the nation. That is to say, it's important for trade. Let's remember, we discussed a while back in a previous slide the notion of economic overproduction, right? And that this particular state of affairs had now set in the United States. Okay, so moving on to a very famous military strategist. His name is Alfred Thayer Mahan. And he wrote this very important work, which is a history of naval power and how that was critical in the achievement of imperial ambitions in history. So basically, he's arguing that we have to follow history, right? He argues that naval power overseas is a crucial condition for national greatness and that we have to modernize our Navy. And to be honest, this was published in 1890. So even by then, the United States was modernizing its Navy, meaning that they're leaving behind the so-called old Navy, the ships made of, wood and, the sails and everything, right? And they're now transitioning towards the new Navy, where you had gunships made of steel and powered by, modern ways like steam and powered by engines and so forth, rather than sails and wind power. Okay, so he recommends later, after the Spanish defeat with the Spanish-American War, he recommends that the United States takes Manila, Manila being the capital of the Philippines, after Dewey defeats the Spanish there. Okay? So here's what he said, quote, "The future of China is quite the most interesting commercial question of the Pacific to us at the present moment. The port of Manila is very centrally situated as regards the whole sweep of the eastern coast of Asia." So here he's looking interestedly at China as being, a big market for the United States, right? Hence commercial question, quote unquote. And he says that easy access could be made to that area through the port of Manila, right? And not only of China, but really quite potentially what we call the Pacific Rim today, right? It's a potential market. Okay, and then moving to a politician here, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, probably one of the most prominent politicians back then. And, of course, a prominent supporter of U.S. militarism and expansionism. Here, he puts it pretty straightforwardly, right? He says, quote, "We make no hypocritical pretense of being interested in the Philippines solely on the account of others. We see our duty for ourselves as well as to others. We believe in trade expansion. We mean to stimulate the expansion of our trade and open new markets." So in other words, he's saying that, hey, we're not doing this just to, help others, right? We actually are self-interested. And of course, he underscores trade expansion. And again, notice how all three commentators here, whether it's the print media, military strategists, or politicians, are setting their sights upon Asia with trade in mind. Okay, so we have to really emphasize that trade. But here's the question: is economic expansion going to convince Americans, right, that, hey, they should all support imperialism, and then, even though it's against the grain of the American belief system, what I like to call America's, quote, secular religion, unquote, that is to say, freedom, democracy, right? Because, again, imperialism is at odds with that. Okay, so what we're going to see is other politicians come up with a constellation of justifications as to why the United States should colonize the Philippines and thus become an imperial power overseas. Now, in this slide, we see a well-known illustration that was published, again, by print media at the time. And it shows Uncle Sam here, and upon his shoulders and his back are all these accoutrements of modernity. And not only that, so-called Western knowledge. Okay, so here you see Uncle Sam, the United States, in other words, as the harbinger, the purveyor of modern life, modernity, such as steel rails for railroads and modern buildings, modern bridges, even stuff like, mowing machines here, bicycles, right? As if there's no bicycles in the Philippines, and so on and so forth. Just, modern technology as a whole. But also notice here in his hand is education and religion. By the way, as with practically all Spanish colonies, the Philippines was overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, so it wasn't exactly, a non-Christian country, right, or colony, that is. But nonetheless, we believe that we were bringing religion to the Philippines. Now, here's Uncle Sam, and you see the Philippines as an area that is almost a stepping stone, so to say, to this area, which is China, right? And here's this person who's supposed to represent China and happily greeting them, right? And, all this wanted here, modern bridges, engines, and, electric light, and all this stuff, clocks, watches. Again, the presumption here was that China was so backwards that they didn't have, any access to this stuff, right? So This is kind of illustrating our justification as to why we should take the Philippines, right? That it's, to use my earlier term, a stepping stone to the markets of China, which seemed unlimited at that time. You have to imagine, hundreds of millions of people at that time as potential consumers of American goods. So now let's look over this famous speech by Senator Beveridge, which he gave in justification for the colonization of the Philippines. And here, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to see him put forth a miscellany of reasons, and not just economic, in other words, as to why we should pursue our imperial ambitions in the Pacific and take the Philippines as a crucial part of that goal. Okay, so he says here, Mr. President, the times call for candor. The Philippines are ours forever. Quote, territory belonging to the United States, unquote, as the Constitution calls them. And just beyond the Philippines are China's illimitable markets. Now, illimitable is the old way of saying unlimited. We will not retreat from either. We will not repudiate our duty in the archipelago. We will not abandon our opportunity in the Orient. We will not renounce our part in the mission of our race, trusty under God of the civilization of the world. And we will move forward to our work, not howling out regrets like slaves whipped to their burdens, but with gratitude for a task worthy of our strength and thanksgiving to Almighty God that He has marked us as His chosen people, henceforth to lead in the regeneration of the world. Now, this single paragraph itself is replete with justifications, as I'm sure you notice. In fact, it's good in your note-taking to label them, according to types of justification. Are they economic? Are they religious? Are they geostrategic? And so on and so forth. So, in fact, let's start at the bottom of this paragraph. He says, thanksgiving to Almighty God that He has marked us as His chosen people, henceforth to lead in the regeneration of the world. So, it's obvious here that he's invoking God here, Almighty God, and he's of the belief that Americans are God's chosen people. And then what does this mean? How does he connect it with the, quote, regeneration of the world? This is basic colonization, right? God has chose the American people to regenerate the world. And if you think about that previous slide, I know it's mostly economic, but, think about the United States as, again, the harbinger of, modern life. And not only that, Western knowledge, right? Science and so forth. So the notion here is that it is incumbent upon Americans to enlighten other people in the world, to guide them from this dark cave of savagery, so we will, and bring them into light of the modern world. Okay. And again, it's a task that, that was, that we are shouldering, right, as God's chosen people. Now, another thing is economic here. We can't ignore that. Of course, Beveridge does it. And he says on top here, just beyond the Philippines are China's illimitable or unlimited markets. So he's saying that, hey, we need Chinese customers, to solve the problem of economic overproduction. Okay, this is the background, the context, the economic context for overseas imperialism. I just mentioned that there are hundreds and millions of potential Chinese customers of American goods. This could be the remedy for overseas production. We just need to tap into that market. The Philippines serves as a gateway towards that economic goal.